In the past couple of days, Josh Jacobs has caused a lot of noise from his comments about the Packers and their wide receiver room, with him saying that he believes the Packers need a proven number one wide receiver. And so Jordan Love went on to NFL Live on ESPN yesterday, and they played the clip of Josh Jacobs and then asked Jordan Love about the whole situation. So here's the question he got asked from Ryan Clark after they showed the Josh Jacobs clip on ESPN. He said, "How do you see this young group, and are there advantages in not having a number one?" Love responds, "Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think we have different guys that can play and do different things better than other guys, and I think we have a wide or a deep receiver room. Obviously, like you mentioned, Tucker Kraft, but I think we have a lot of guys that can grow into that role, and I think we're young. We're still building this thing, and guys are still proving themselves." So Josh, made those comments, and, yeah, I always ride for my guys. I love the guys we have. I always say if you add good players to an already good offense, I think you can make it a better team. And so it's clear there that Jordan Love is not going to be taking the same approach as Josh Jacobs, where Jacobs was very honest, and I was sort of shocked he had said his comments about the receivers, just because I think even if players believe that lots of times, they will keep it to themselves just because they don't want to cause any potential locker room problem. And I don't have a problem with Josh Jacobs saying that he thinks the Packers need a veteran receiver, because I do think that when you have a veteran leader, holding guys to a higher standard, it can lead to your team being better. And I think if we look back at Aaron Rodgers over the years in Green Bay, for a lot of different times, he was making it clear that certain guys, certain receivers needed to play better. And I was actually watching a clip from 2022 this morning as I was, thinking about this whole topic. And it was a clip from ESPN with Rob Demovsky. And Rodgers had said back in 2022 during training camp that guys who don't catch the ball won't play. And so I assume if Rodgers had been with the Packers this year, there probably would have been a lot of frustration just because of all the drop passes. According to Pro Football Reference, the Packers had the third most dropped passes in the NFL. And so there's no doubt that this wide receiver room does need to be more consistent, and Josh Jacobs made that clear. But not only that, he said they need to add another guy. And so I don't have a problem with it. I was sort of surprised that he said it, but it looks like Josh Jacobs is really trying to take on that veteran role. And I feel like he's the right guy to be in this kind of position, because I think when you have someone holding other players to a higher standard, whoever that player is has to be, pretty solidified in who they are in the NFL. And I feel like with Josh Jacobs, there aren't really any questions with him. There's not really things he desperately needs to get better at. Of course, every player can always improve, but Josh Jacobs put up the sixth most rush yards in the NFL behind a Packers offensive line that ranked 23rd in run block win rate per ESPN. And so Josh Jacobs, he had to evade a lot of tackles. He had the third most yards after contact. And so I think that if you have someone, making these kind of public comments, then I think they have to be someone where there's not a lot of questions about them. And I think with Jordan Love, he may not be the kind of leader where he wants to publicly say things like this. He seems to be different than Aaron Rodgers in that regard. I do think if you're an Aaron Rodgers type player, as the seasons go on, if Jordan Love is 34 years old playing at a top tier level and he is 25-year-old receivers, I do think that relationship can be different, where at that point maybe Jordan does take a more Aaron Rodgers type approach. I still think he's a different individual kind of personality than Aaron Rodgers, but still at the same time, I think that does evolve as you are in the NFL more and more. And I think that's one thing about this team. They're the youngest team in the NFL. And so because of that, it's sort of been more like a group of guys where they all sort of feel similar to each other, where Jordan probably doesn't feel too different from some of the rookies. Even though he's been in the NFL a long time, there's not a massive age difference like Rodgers had with lots of these young receivers when Rodgers was, late 30s, and some of these receivers like Dobbs and Watson, the first year they came in were in, their young 20s. So when you have close to a 20-year age gap, that's going to change how the quarterback relates to players. But Jordan, as I said there, reading his quote, he is not going to be taking the same approach. He's not saying here, like Josh Jacobs, that the Packers need to go out and add a veteran receiver, but he does add that if you add good players to an already good offense, I think you can make it a better team. So obviously, I think if you're any type of quarterback in the NFL, you would always welcome your GM coming in and adding more talent, adding more players, whether that's at receiver, whether that's on the defensive side of the ball. And so I think going forward, at first, I think it looked like from Dontavian Wicks' response, which I covered on this channel, he responded to the Josh Jacobs quote and put some laughy emojis and a thumb down emoji. And it could be that, maybe someone like Wicks didn't expect Josh Jacobs to say this publicly. And I could understand where if you're a receiver, Josh Jacobs is basically calling you out and saying the Packers need a better receiver. And I get Josh Jacobs' point. And I think that he made some other points. I saw it on the Locked On Packers podcast. He was talking on there, and he said that bringing a veteran receiver in will also open things up for other players. And so I don't think Josh Jacobs is out here trying to bash these young receivers. I think he's just making the point, which we all do know, is that they need to be more consistent. Lots of times we just don't see that come out from the players in the locker room. Lots of times they probably keep the criticism more private. And so I think at first maybe the receivers felt a certain way about it, but I honestly don't think it's going to be much of a problem. I think that, Wicks needs to get better. A lot of these guys need to get better. Wicks had the worst drop rate, according to PFF, with I can't remember the target amount or the minimum amount of snaps, but it wasn't 0 because you have some guys in there with, like one play and they drop it, so they have a 100% drop rate. But there was some kind of threshold there, either 50 plays, 100 plays, something like that. But he had one of the worst drop rates in the league. Jaden Reed was 5th. And so I think the Packers no doubt need to improve when it comes to consistency and catching the ball. But I also think that Jordan Love needs to be a more consistent quarterback, especially in big-time games. He has to play better. He needs to be better in the playoffs. He can't have the kind of performance he had against the Eagles and expect for this Packers team to go all the way. And so I think there's a lot of different aspects of this team that, do need to be improved going forward. And I think that if you're Brian Gutekunst, I'm not sure that he's going to add a top-tier receiver that's going to cost a lot of money. It doesn't feel like that's necessarily the kind of thing he has done in the past or may want to do in the future. He could always break away from what he typically does, but if what the Packers, have done in the past continues, I don't see him adding a top-tier receiver who's older and is going to cost a lot of money. Now, a more veteran-type guy who's maybe a little cheaper, that could make more sense. I put out a video sharing who I think the Packers' top 5 free agents. And I did include some high-valued ones if the Packers did decide to go that route, even though I would lean towards that most likely not being the case. But those are my thoughts. If you want more Packers content, feel free to subscribe down below, and I'll see you guys next time.